So I'll just start from here. Okay. तर जसं तुम्ही आता थोड्या वेळापूर्वी सांगितलं म्हणजे my background is only computer science and physics. But how I got interested, my main interest was photography as such. And I was doing it casual photography. As in, like I was always interested in it because of the physics. So basically, how light works and exactly how that converts into photograph and all that. So that was my interest area. That's how I started with. 2011, I had my first DSLR camera, but it was only used for typical house. I mean, basically, whatever functions that we have in house. This for that reason. And maybe whenever you go on a family trips, तिथे काहीतरी निसर्ग किंवा फुलं फळं काय दिसली तर दॅट्स ऑल. इट वॉज ओनली लिमिटेड टू दॅट. But one good thing I realized that it's a very good medium for me to express. I mean, by nature, I don't talk much, so I prefer to keep quiet and listen. So this was one good medium because I don't have to talk and I still will be able to express. So that was one interest area for me. Photography was one interest area for me because of that. As I said, 2017, late 2017, I started going for photography tours. And first few, at least first 5 6 tours were with Vyang, Makarand and Yuvraj. That's how I started with. And all those tours, typically accessories were camera and lens. Again, no notebooks, no binoculars. So from documentation point of view, absolutely zero, plus zero knowledge as well. So nothing, no background as such in that. But I started going with camera and lens, and the first experience itself I liked, to be in the jungle basically, wherever we go. And that is one good part because I started going with Vyang. Makarand and Yuvraj were very good, I'll say, mentors for newcomers basically. So photography was an aspect, but what to look for. So basically, if you go in a jungle, look at the jungle. I mean, don't have expectations. So enjoy whatever that is there. Enjoy whatever nature provides. And keep cleanliness. I mean, don't litter or dirty the environment where we go into. So all those sort of, plus of course, ethical things in photography in terms of not to disturb animals or birds or even insects and all that. So those sort of the basic dhade आहेत पहिले, that I went through because of Makarand and Yuvraj. So that was a good company. Fortunately for me, I started with them. Okay, this is just one photograph from my first ever trip that I made in Fansad with Vian. And it was a macro photography tour, though of course that time I didn't have much of a knowledge. I didn't have a macro lens also. So I had a normal 18 150 115 lens, and using that I was taking these photos. Although while all these guys were taking macro photographs. Just for record, I've just mentioned what they were photographing. Again, this photo is mine, but not from that trip, from a subsequent trip. So that is where I started learning. So basically, why they were engrossed in photographing is because this particular pose where the gecko is trying to clear its eye using the tongue. And what's the specialty in that basically is because from Yuvraj, then I learned that the geckos don't have an eyelid. So when it rains, it's not possible for them to clean it otherwise or keep it shut. The only way that they can do is use their tongue and then clean it. So you wait for that opportunity where of course, it rains. Typically, these macro photography tours are happening in June, July, August. So in the monsoon days, so it rains, and whenever it rains, there's an opportunity that you get. So be ready for that. So that's a kind of initial learning training I started with that trip. Then just sometime back, Amol, I was just talking about macro, whether I do macro or not. See, again, when I started, obviously I had no clue. I just knew photography means camera and you take photos. That's all. But then I started getting into wildlife, as in like going to the jungles. I realized there are multiple categories. I mean, you have to decide what you want to concentrate on, what you want to do. So there were three categories that typically I got interested in. First one was macro, which again, from my it's a simple definition. I know people sometimes use the term micro instead of macro, so I'm not getting into much of details. It is macro, but my simple definition is whatever pictures that I take with the macro lens, it's macro for me. typically the insects, reptiles, butterflies, all those sort of objects when I photograph. That is what I treated as under macro category. Then next was birding. And initially, although I started with macro, so a lot of initial tools were with macro, but then I got more interested in birding. So today, my major interest area of all is birding. So that's what I like more. Again, I there are basically that birding can happen anywhere. I mean, you can do it from your window as well. Trails around the city, forest birding, and the third little controversial, I'll say, part about hide or studio photography. So there are a lot of naturalists, or there are a lot of birders who don't consider hide or studio as something that they should go for. But I'm okay. I mean, first of all, my initial interest was photography. So from that point of view, hide or studio is the best environment where you can learn, where you can take your time, learn photography, and once you start with it, then okay, then you go graduate to forest birding and all those things. Forest birding is typically pure birding because photography opportunities are little lesser. Birds are very shy. They'll keep behind leaves and foliages and trees. So it's always difficult. So hide to start with for any new photographer, that's the best thing to start with, because then you get to see a lot of birds. You can photograph as well. And the third category is mammals, which of course a large part in India, at least, it is all tiger centric. I mean, tiger centric is to the extent that not just people. This is just some representative examples that I had seen in two of my trees, Bandhavgarh and Pench. It is like as if like there is nothing else in the jungle. That's it. It's only tiger. I mean, if you see tiger, trip is successful. If you don't see the tiger, trip is unsuccessful. That's a simple definition. A lot of people go with. And in fact, in the photograph on the right, you see everybody is looking at the right direction. There was a tiger in the cave, which didn't come out for all the 3 hours that we were there that day. But towards left, there was a lot of action happening. In fact, at one point, a jackal actually came quite well in the open. It was there to photograph, but nobody even looked at it. It again, it is two ways. I mean, basically, people have expectations about tigers, so they will always want tigers. But even the guides and the drivers are so used to that, they won't show you anything else. So just one example, once in Bandhavgarh, we had a driver. He was very good in terms of tracking tigers and then giving you perfect angles for photography, etc., etc. But we told him that it's tigers is okay, but if we don't see tigers, we are okay to see birds and all. So the way he said, sir, वो पंछी देख के ना बहुत नींद आती है मुझे. That's what the thing he said. And he, for all the 5 safaris, he never bothered to even look at any birds. Although we kept on telling him, you go a little slow, we will look for birds. If it is there, we will ask you to stop. But he never showed interest. So, and again, that's true because probably 90%, 95% of his customers or travelers would be interested only in that. So it's an entire system. But luckily, for me, I enjoy even the jungle as well. In fact, one of my first trips, we were in Jhalana in Jaipur, and one good thing there was, so again, this was my first trip, so everything was new to me. At one point, the guide just stopped the vehicle at one corner in the jungle. He wanted to, of course, listen for the cues, if there are any signals coming from anywhere about the leopard. But he stopped, and then there was no noise, so nobody said anything. There was pin drop silence. ती नीरव शांतता जी होती जंगलातली, that also is an experience I really like. म्हणजे not just look at whatever is there in the jungle, but even the quiet calmness, that also you enjoy. If you start enjoying that, that's when you will really like to be in the jungle. Otherwise, you'll always be behind and going with some expectation. Then sometimes the expectation gets fulfilled, sometimes it won't. So you would be happy, sometimes unhappy. But if you go without any expectations, that's the best experience you can have. That is of course my experience. Then once I started in all three categories, I realized that obviously my knowledge is zero. I mean, although whoever I go with, people are trying to teach you, but basically I have no knowledge. I mean, I've never been to any jungle. I have not done trekking in the past. Whatever travels I have done all over the world, it's all for my office work, and it's only to attend meetings and maybe going to popular places just to see whatever is popularly known. That's all. No jungle, nothing of that sort. So obviously there has to be some learning. So which is how I started looking at it. 2-4 जणांना तेव्हा मी विचारलं की काय करता येईल, कुठे शिकता येईल. So one option that came ahead of me was BNHS. Obviously, I mean I had a BNHS life membership as well at that time. So I did a BNHS ornithology course to begin with, year 18-19, and then while I was doing the ornithology course, they had done an advertisement in between for migration specific course, bird migration and migration study techniques. That course was a full-time course, like for 2 weeks, 9 to 5 classrooms sessions, and then there was 1 week of actual bird ringing training, which happened in Point Caliber. Though of course I missed that because I had some other plan. But this was good opportunity because by then I had left my job, so I had time, and full time also was possible. And this course actually is for it's under that green skill development program from government. So typically it is for college kids who just passing out from say BSc, MSc zoology and those sort of things, do want to make a career in that particular field. Typically it was for that, but since this was the first time they were announcing and there were not enough candidates, they allowed others also to join. So I got lucky there and I joined it. I had time, so it was very good learning for me because migration as such, of course, is a very vast topic. But in terms of why they do it or what are different types of migrations, how it can be studied, etc., etc., a lot of things. In 2 weeks, those BNHS guys covered it really well. The only unfortunate part was I couldn't go to Point Calimar. Otherwise, that experience would have been the best. But somehow I couldn't go for it. Then subsequent year I did a course in biodiversity because birding was one aspect, but there was other things also. Obviously, I wanted to learn something about it. So in terms of other parts, I mean not just mammals, vanaspati and insects. I mean, all those sort of things. Everything I had to get some knowledge at least. So at least that is what I started with. So besides the course knowledge, there were other advantage of doing that course. I get to know people like Dr. Raju Kadambe or other scientists from BNHS. Since we were doing course with them, since we were interacting with them, there was a lot of exposure that I got to those guys. But more than that, what I liked more was I could make a lot of like-minded friends. And luckily, what happened is I realized that there are a lot of people like me who have no background, no knowledge. So I could discuss freely. I mean, sometimes I might have a silly doubt. It becomes difficult to ask an expert who would feel काय विचारतोय म्हणजे अगदी त्याला काय माहित नाही असं. So that at least won't be happening with this because here everybody is having a similar background. So it becomes easy. Then we started participating in small trails within cities. So we formed groups and everybody was new. So identification itself was problem for everyone, but we could learn together. So that was the advantage that I had going with BNHS that time. Then as I started going for more and more trips, I started doing some documentation. Though of course, documentation there it is only for my own purpose. So for example, if I go on a birding trail or birding trip, which birds or which mammals did I see? So I started maintaining the list. So after every trip, I started maintaining an Excel sheet where you maintain what all birds that you have seen. But again, I mean, once I started doing that, I realized there are a lot of issues in terms of whether to use common names, whether to use scientific names. Of course, there are scientific names that itself was a revelation for me first. But after doing that, and then the question was, I started looking at it with based on the books that were available or whoever I was working with or talking to. There were a lot of name changes that I realized after doing this. So one example was the purple swampin, which was earlier called purple swampin, now it's called graded swampin. So some list in Excel I might have maintained this as purple swampin. Some other place I might call it graded swampin because by then I came to know about the new name. Same thing with many other birds as well. So a lot of times that Oriental got converted to Indian and those sort of things. So it was little difficult then to actually see whether it's the same bird or it's a different bird. So all those sort of confusion was there because I was maintaining in the Excel sheets. One funny part was that after getting into birding, I realized these are all colors: rufous, reddy, russet. So, in fact, first time in Sattal when I saw a russet sparrow, I had no clue whether russet actually means some color. I thought somebody, Mr. Russet, would have found sparrow, it looks different, so therefore it calls as it. So those sort of things. But I started learning. I mean, these are also colors. So again, I mean, it has nothing to do with documentation, but it's just fun that I came to know because of this. So then the next step was first thing was Excel. So that is how I started with.
Uday, sorry, interestingly, this prefix Brahmini
Huh.
is also color because
That's
a
right.
lot of
Yeah, it is. It's orangish that shade or coloration that you see. You
correct,
can see
correct.
Brahmini kite. You can see Brahmini starling. The same coloration. You see that pattern.
Yes,
Brownish
I've read.
orange is that coloration is what gets the name. Nothing to do
Yeah.
with the caste.
So every time you go on a trip, people will tell you this is Brahmini so and so, Brahmini that, etc.
Again, but whatever I'm saying based on my knowledge, and you have to take it as I'm not an expert, so you probably have to confirm it with the expert in the field anyway.
No, no,
But yeah,
Brahmini
this
is a
is based on
color.
my knowledge. Yeah,
Brahmini is a color, all right.
yeah. Okay.
Mm.
So
Even I have done the crash course in ornithology under Raju Kasambe.
yeah.
So
Okay.
thanks.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
fine. So yeah. So first, although as I said, Excel I had problems with. Then again, I mean, this was one decision that I had taken that time. What software to use to maintain my list, photographs basically. So a lot of debate that time, and then I chose the Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom combination, which is a photography combo that they sell. Again, it's little costly. It costs around 800 rupees a month at subscription, and it's definitely a costly thing, but I found it's very good. In fact, um, uh, I thought of doing it and to begin with a proper software. And luckily, I mean, I took that decision, but I think I'm not at all regretting. I'm very happy with that decision for whatever reason. Basically, there are so many changes that keep happening in there. Plus, Lightroom for my cataloging or keeping the photo records, this is the best software from that point of view. Lightroom, the advantage here I was getting was that all these bird names, the changes and all, I could handle it very easily. Plus, a single list for all trips. So every trip, I'll still have it entire thing in that Lightroom catalog, the same catalog. Not only that, then I started. Initially, it was only per trip the list. Then little bit of segregation I started doing in terms of keeping Himalayan birds or forest birds or birds on water bodies. Again, I mean, these are not scientific definitions per se. This is what I learned based on whatever I could see. So I went to Sattal. I said, okay, this is Himalayan bird. So it's not a clear definition. There are some birds you will see, could be forest bird, could be Himalayan birds, but that is how I started doing. So that is what I maintained. So under forest, all forest birds that I had seen will go under that category. Then under Himalayan, all birds in that category. So that's how I started. Similarly for mammals, the wildcats and other categories that I started doing that categorization. So there was flexibility in defining the structure. So basically, if I named it as Oriental white eye and the name got changed to Indian white eye, it's very easy. I mean, I'll just change the tag in Lightroom to that. All photos will naturally reflect the new name. So I don't have to change every Excel sheet. So that was the advantage I started having in the Lightroom documentation. Then, as I was doing, I started learning, and of course, not just doing the documentation, but also, of course, as part of the courses or as part of whatever other learnings that I was doing. I realized that this definition of forest birding and water bird and all is absolutely useless. So it's better to go with the bird families. So all raptors again. I mean, uh, falcons will come in different category. The accipiters will come in different category. So those sort of families, if I maintain it under the family, then it becomes much simpler. So that is a universally accepted standard, so to say, to keep the families and species under the families. So that's once I have that segregation, now that keyword list that I have can be easily shared. I mean, anybody is using Lightroom, I can export my keyword list and that can be used as is. So of course, the only thing is that I'm not having that entire list of all species and all families. Whenever I find a new bird, keep adding to it. So for example, some families I may not have any bird under that category, then I won't have it in my keyword list. As and when I see, I will keep on adding it. So that is how I intend. Plus, in addition to that, there are two other aspects that I learned in terms of keeping the folders, directories, file names. So basically, I had heard from some friends, classic example, because typically the cameras will name whatever that uh, photo 0001, not photo, whatever that Canon, Nikon will have different styles, but 0001 up to 9999, and then again it will start from 001. So people accidentally have overwritten whatever they had done for the past trips because they didn't keep it in separate directories and all. It got overwritten. So I had learned. Luckily, here I learned from others' mistake, not my own mistake. I didn't miss any of my photographs because of that. Because fortunately, actually, I started using Lightroom quite early, and as when I started using, I uh, did some online, again, not the courses as such, but a lot of resources are available, learning resources. So learned that file naming was the first thing that I did. So all my photographs will have first the either the occasion or city in the file name, then the date and time, full date, DDMM, YYYY, and HHMMSS seconds, and then the camera body. So that's all the data which is there in my file name. So every time I upload the data into Lightroom, that's the first thing that I do. Just run that command, it changes the names. So I don't have the problem of overwriting photographs with newer trips. Second learning that I had was backups. So although it is kept in my hard disk on my desktop, lot of times the data becomes so big that cloud backup and all also options that I looked at. But then what I did, I keep two additional hard disks, the USB hard disk, and I keep backups onto that. So there are one which is there in my desktop plus two separate hard disks are there as backup. So again, most of these learnings are learned from others' mistake, so to say. So this is just to show an example. This is what my Lightroom catalog looks. The top, if you see, you can see the mouse cursor, right? What I'm using.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
So basically, these are all Vangidae. These are all families, and if you click on that arrow, it will show the specific species under that family. So whenever I get bird, I just tick against that, so it gets tagged in that family. So all families will get automatically tagged. But besides the family names, there are a lot of other things I categorize. So I put persons, I put locations. So specific locations wherever possible, I try to put that as well. So each of my photo will have bird photo will have the bird species family. It will have the location. Plus, there are certain specific things I want to track. For example, within birds, if I want to identify the nictitating membranes of the birds or certain specific behavior, feeding behavior or nesting, then I create a tag or keyword in my Lightroom, and I tag it for each photograph. So basically, searching later becomes very easy. So whenever I want to search for a photograph with a nictitating membrane from, say, LRK, then I'll be able to search anything of that sort. Plus, sometimes I even do filtering. Again, that smart filters are also available in Lightroom. So an example here is this mom and me. So basically, in Africa, there were a lot of photographs that we got where the either the parent, mother, father, or the offspring, the little one, were together, either similar poses or exactly similar looking. And so I wanted to categorize all of that together. So I created this filter and then just tagged each of my photographs to it, so that whichever folder the photographs are, just one click on this me here line here will show me those 39 photographs under that category. That's how easy I can track. Plus, I can do a lot of other filtering. So, for example, the first filter here is in terms of the date, then the camera model that I have used, or keywords that I have defined. Now, in addition to that, Lightroom has a lot of star ratings and all. So I can rate from 0 to 5 star ratings for each of my photographs. So if I want to keep good photographs, again, whatever I call good, would say 2 or 3, or there are excellent photographs, then it could go to a different category. And then I want to search whatever my best photographs, I will be able to search it based on that. In addition to that, it has flags, it has colors, so you can define red colors. Again, what you use it, that's up to you. But there's a facility. So, for example, nowadays what I do is some of the photographs I need only to upload to say eBird or iNaturalist. So it's only for that purpose. But then once that is done, I don't want those photographs. So what I do is I mark this as a blue color. Again, why blue? No logic. It's just that I started using blue, so that is what I do. So those all blue colors. Then once that part is done, at the end of say end of month or end of the trip, entire thing, I just select all blue photographs and delete it all in one go. That is what how I use it. People can use it for different purposes, but that's how easy it is. If you have cataloging software like Lightroom. Again, I am only talking about Lightroom because I only use that. But there would be other options available, and people would be able to do it with other softwares as well. This I was able to do it with birds, but when I started doing it for insects, I found it very difficult. I stopped doing it. Right now I keep it as insects, and sometimes I do for butterflies. There are six families that I could understand, so I keep it under that. But I found it a little difficult. So for right now, it is not as arranged as it is for birding basically. But I have what can I say? Opportunity at later point also I'll be able to distinguish them, and I can create that chart, and automatically even my old photographs will be under that category, because right now I'm just keeping it at certain names. So for example, Blue Oak Cliff, at least I'm keeping it at Blue Oak Cliff. Tomorrow if I decide to tag that Blue Oak Cliff under different categories, I'll be able to easily do it because the photograph will have that base category available. Then as I started going to various trips, lot of interesting observations I could see. Again, when I say observations, it's not entirely my observations. It is because people whom I'm going with, the experts, they would have observed, or people in the past would have observed or kept track or kept records, did documentation. So all of that would result in those learnings that I'll say. First example here, I'm just showing a photograph of birds and robbery. It is basically ornithophily, the pollination that the birds do. I think that is called, the branch is called ornithophily. Again, if I'm wrong, please ignore. But whatever I understand, that branch is called ornithophily, wherein the relationship between flowers or the trees, plants, and birds is what gets studied. So basically, what we know is birds do. It's like a give and take relationship. The birds take the nectar, but at the same time, they help the trees in doing pollination. That's a purpose. So that is how they both evolved probably. But sometimes the birds are smart, so they do robbery. So in this case here, the sunbird actually is robbing the nectar without helping the flower, the tree, the plant by doing any pollination. It's not taking part in any pollination. It is not inserting the beak through the opening, but it is breaking the portion here where the bird knows the nectar is, and just stealing it from there. Then next thing I learned was in terms of birds. So a typical question, if I ask anyone, I mean, not you guys here, but in a public in general, where do bird stay for their nights? They'll say on the trees, and the nest will be on the trees. So that is the general understanding, and probably even I had the same understanding till I went to this one place. I'll show the photograph. This is how plain and simple the nest is. So for me, the first thing when I saw it was shocking. In fact, if you see, there's a small mark here. I'm just trying to show it through my mouse. That is a track where our vehicle had gone. It was so close. While we were going, आम्हाला माहितीच नव्हतं की तिकडे घरटा आहे म्हणून. Only when we got down from the vehicle, we realized we passed so close to that bird, and we could have easily disturbed it or even killed the bird. I mean, unfortunate part was, but that's how sometimes the birds keep it. Again, I was what I'll say objected in taking this photograph from with whom we went, but I promised them that I'll not going to put this anywhere in the social media. It's only I'll use it for such presentations or when I want to explain certain things. Only then I'm going to use that. So I'll not get into details of where I took the photo or which bird and all. Of course, many of you will know anyway. But I didn't tell you. Then the next thing I learned in terms of plumages. I mean, this was completely a shock to me. Like birds look, what we see them in India is entire. It could be entirely different in what when they go to their breeding zones or their native places. They could be looking completely different. And the stark or the vast difference is the example of this particular bird here. It is you can't make out that it is it changes in such a vast way. But that's a learning. So I mean most of my photographs are from the from this region only, India, and typically we do it when the birds come here during winter. Lot of time they'll shade all of their nice looking feathers and all, but we are happy to see even those colors here. The rough, typically even in India, whatever we see, it's good looking, but when it goes to its breeding grounds, it completely changes. So that was one learning that I said. And again, this is possible only because somebody is actually keeping track. It's the same bird that is moving from this location to the other location. And it's not two different species that we are looking at. Then I was aware of migration, the Great Migration of Africa. That's the mammal migration. But besides the that Great Migration, they have something called as Loita migration that happens. The Great Migration typically happens between north and south. So from north then to south. This one, Loita migration, happens from Loita plains, which are basically towards the east side. And from there, they go towards Masai Mara, which is on the western side. This I came to know because we went to Masai Mara in February, and the place where we stayed, there were lots of wildebeest, and in fact, there wildebeest, lot of young ones as well, as in like a lot of newborns were during that time. So that's how we got the question, and then the local guys explained to us that this is a different migration, which is not the Great Migration, but this also happens, and then this is happens at a different time. So February, March was the time when you will see a lot of them coming into Masai Mara region. And the major parts of the winter migration, of course, it's a big thing to study. So few of the things that I mean I got interested in or I found it interesting is what I'm just showing here. One example is the bar-headed goose that can fly over the Himalayan peaks. I mean, आधीपर्यंत असंच माहिती होतं की बदकं काय फारशी उडत नाही. So even if they fly, they would probably go from one pond to other or one water body to other, that sort of thing. But to know that they can actually fly at that height, at that low oxygen levels, continuously for hours or days, if they can fly, which means there has to be some special mechanism. So obviously, again, I mean, this also is because somebody studied their pattern. Somebody studied how do they travel. So somebody would have tracked their flight, know the paths and those sort of things. But it's an interesting thing that I found. Then there's Arctic terns, which during the year they travel almost 80,000 kilometers, moving from breeding grounds to wintering grounds and then back. 80,000 kilometers. That was amazing thing. Again, this is not my image. There's certain, I mean, most of the photographs that I've used here are mine, but there are few cases. Of course, I have not seen the bird, so I don't have photograph. So I've tried to use somebody else's photograph here. Same thing with this great snipe. It can reach a speed of 100 kilometers per hour during migration. Then we have Bartel godwits. They can travel non-stop for 11,000 kilometers. And this was just interesting thing was this year in Akshi, I saw these Bartel godwits. And apparently they must have also flown the same sort of distance. They would have down still, and they must be very tired. So with all the travel, so that bird was so busy, engrossed in feeding or eating or whatever on that beach, that we came so close to it. It didn't run away. Maybe it was so hungry that probably it didn't bother anything else and just was trying to gather all the nourishment that it can get from the food. Again, that is just my observations. Could be right, wrong, But that's what I saw. And this is a fact, but it travels for those that much of a distance, can travel that much of a distance without taking any break. Then there were few more observations that that I had seen. Again, the earlier ones were related to birds, but some other things. So this once I went with Yuvraj to Eur, and then of course he knows lot of things about the orchids. But this one orchid that he said we will be able to see, where the orchid mimics like a honeybee, and so female honeybee in that too, so that the male honeybee will come and try to sit on it and then help the pollination for the. The it is just amazing, the creativity or whatever that you call the creation of nature. It looks so similar to actual bee. I just it's just fascinating to see how it would have evolved over the years to get to this shape. I don't think that is how it started with first, maybe millions of years ago, but gradually it got into this shape. It's interesting, in fact, to study that as well. This another thing is the Vigna vexillata, or I think Hattichi Sond, I think it's called in Marathi. This I saw in Kas, where very amazing thing was that this is a stick kept over here. That is just to put the required weight on the area below. So if you put certain thing which is very light, nothing will happen. But if you put a object, or actually the insect, when insect comes, and not any insect, but a specific insect which has that much of weight, automatically the white thing that you see, it's all comes out, a mechanical arm sort of thing. It just comes out, sticks pollens to the insect, and then goes back again. It works so smoothly. It is like a machine that nature has created. And I have actually a video. I'll not probably be able to play it here, but maybe if time permits, I'll just try to see, because it's a video that it actually comes out, puts it there, and then goes back again. So that's a amazing mechanism that nature has created. And these are Ceropegias. Again, most of these images are from Kas. Ceropegias, lot of you probably, for a lot of you it might be a repetition or known things, but at least somebody who's not aware. For me, it was a new learning, so I'm just explaining it in that way. These are not insectivorous plants. They don't eat insects, but they trap insect for possibly overnight, or that maybe a night or two, that period. They have a structure by which the the insects get guided inside the cavity, so to say. And there's a bulb below where the nectar is. So they reach till that place. There's a hair structure inside which allows the bird to go down. So the hairs on the surrounding of the cylinder are pointing downwards. So naturally the insect will be able to easily reach to the bulb, where it can have nectar when it collects pollen on its body, etc., etc. But it can't come out, because as I said, the hairs are in the downward direction. They will not allow the bird to move out. And only when the flower wilts, or full म्हणजे ती कळी जी उमललेली आहे ती परत हे गेली, बंद झाली, की then the flower turns downwards, and that's when the insect will be able to come out. So it's a very tricky process. I came to know from the expert that at times the insect that gets trapped inside probably gets into shock and then dies inside. Again, that is not the purpose of the tree, but it happens sometimes. So therefore it is very difficult actually for the pollination to happen in these cases, because out of all the insects that they probably trap, not all may be able to do the pollination for them. And one bad aspect about this is that these flowers are really amazing, and people think that since it's endangered, we will try to grow it in our home or our plants and that sort of thing. So lot of times people take it out, pluck it out, and then take it home. It doesn't work that way. I mean, they have this specific environment, this habitat, that is where they'll grow. Not just the habitat or the soil or the weather from that point of view, but the kind of insects, because not every insect will be able to do pollination for every tree or plant. But specific insects, if they're not there, even then the pollination will not happen. So the trees will not grow really. You know, that's a learning that I had from all this. Again, there are so many types of Ceropegias. I have seen only 5 of them, but I think there are some 28 or so, I think 20 plus at least. Seropages. This is insectivorous plant, the Drosera indica. It looks so cute, but it can trap the insect and actually suck out all the juices, all the nutrients from the insect that it captures, so to say. I think the raid point you see here have some stickiness around it, so when the insect sits there, it will get it will then will not be able to move. To पकड़ला जाईल त्याच्यातच. And the last example is brood parasitism. Of course, we had all heard the stories about cuckoo, Asian quail, and म्हणजे कोकिळा कावळ्याच्या घरट्यात अंडी घालते. This was a known thing, but here the example is so stark that such a small bird it is trying to feed the big bird or the offspring of some cuckoo. But I mean, that's how nature works. So that's again another learning that I have. Again, this is not my image. This I have taken from internet. Now, all this while, whatever that I showed, there's a learning that I had because I understood that because somebody has done the documentation, because somebody had taken the effort of either noting it down or doing whatever sort of, whether in terms of photographs or videos, or just keeping records on notebooks, keeping records on some sites or some sort of thing. So that is what I'm getting the fruits. Somebody has done the effort. So that's where I kind of started thinking about doing it for possibly for future generations or for somebody, some others. I mean, whoever can use that data. And that's when I started making the public records, or at least thought about doing public records. Till the time, whatever that I talked about in terms of Lightroom or Excel sheets and all, it was documentation only for my own purpose. So I could see whatever I have seen and those sort of things. But here, if I start putting it in eBird just as an example, then that data can be available to scientists who want to use it. And just one thing here, I mean, just an example that I want to give. Every time I go with the experts on the field to any place, like places like Matharan or any of the places, when people will start saying, "अरे आम्ही 10 वर्षापूर्वी इथे यायचो तेव्हा एवढे पक्षी असायचे, आता तुम्हाला काहीच दिसत नाही, म्हणजे 10% पण नसतील कदाचित." It could be a fact, of course. I mean, it would be a fact because people would have been coming or doing that for so long. But there's no data. I mean, whether it was 10 times or 15 times or 9 times or 2 times, that is there, whatever that they are then seen. But has anybody kept that record in terms of I've seen 10 vertical flycatchers in that area? That sort of thing record probably was not there. In fact, eBird, since it started maybe a few years back, they have started recording the data. But sometimes you get certain strange examples. So for example, in a particular area, you see a bird quite commonly, and when you try to enter it in eBird, it says it is rare or not common. Could be because people are not recorded the fact in eBird. So eBird, of course, will go based on whatever data that they have, and so therefore it could be. So it could be a rare for it. But as and when you start entering more data with photographs or with information, it will become a rich database. And so 10 years afterwards, so for example, now we are in 2020, 21, 2030, so we'll have data for 10-15 years. So then we can really say in 2015, whatever the numbers that you see in this area, in this season or this month, and what we see today, there will be a proper comparison that can be done. But for that to happen, we have to maintain that data. So we have to start recording all our not just bird data, but all biodiversity data that we collect. So I typically do it in two things, eBird and iNaturalist. So I'll just try to go around these two applications and give little bit details on that, whatever that I've been using, whatever that I know of. The eBird tool, or it is from Cornell Lab, and it's available on website as well as mobile. So the interface is a little different. Mobile is more suited to actually doing the tracking. So for example, if I'm on a birding trail, I will start eBird. So the first thing that it will ask is start recording. So the moment you say start recording, it has option. I mean, not just the time that it keeps track of, but it can track even the GPS coordinates. So for example, if I start Bhanduk pumping station, the point that I start, it will start recording the GPS coordinates for that point. And so whatever distance I covered, it has actually the entire track. So it knows that you traveled probably for 3 kilometers and you started at 7 o'clock and ended at 10. So you keep recording the data as and when you see the bird there. That is how easy it is. For website, it is little different. I mean, okay, there's one aspect, because typically if I go with camera, it becomes difficult to keep recording in mobile. So I don't do it on field most of the times, but I take the photographs and all photographs that I use, and at a later date, I do the data entry in eBird on their website. So website, it becomes a little easier, because then you choose what type of trip that you had, whether you are actually traveling or whether you went for a leisure but there were birds in front of you, so you started looking at it. So all those options are available when you do it from the website. So that is what I typically use. But the best it can be done is on the mobile. So typical birders will use the mobile interface, because as and when you see it, you record it. So chances of missing something is not there. In terms of, for me, if I don't remember and I couldn't photograph a bird, then it is likely that I might miss while doing it on website. This is typical screen of the mobile. So they said, I mean, it keeps track, start time, date automatically. When I click on this record track, it will keep the GPS tag. If I don't want to do it, I can put that off. And start checklist, it will start showing the checklist there. And this is the web interface. So it keeps track of during this year how many. This is again after I have logged in, so it is my data. Species observed during this year, this month, or today. Total how many checklists that I created. So all those sort of data that you can have it here. The number of species that I have observed so far, all that data is easily available. So I've actually found this very, very good. Typically for keeping my life list or everybody's life list, this is much easier. So this I started doing in 2019, mid 2019, around that time. And last year when we were under the lockdown, so obviously we couldn't go anywhere. That's the time I utilized to update all the records up to that date. So all my previous trips, although I didn't know whatever I would have seen, but I'll go based on whatever photographs that I have. So sometimes it might have been possible that photos were not good, so I've deleted it. So some species data may not have got recorded, but at least whatever photographs that I had, I started recording it. And since it allows past data as well, so 2018, 2017, whatever data that I had, I could enter it very easily in that. Positives about this software is, one good thing is, again, if you go on a trail and there are 4 of you, 5 of you, it's not necessary that all of you have to maintain separate list. You can create one list and mention the team size 4 or 5 or whatever. Again, I mean, that is only for their records. There's no check and balance to see whether actually there were 4 people or not. But you can keep that data, and then you can share the list that you've created with others. So everybody doesn't have to have their own list. In addition to that, sometimes what happens is that the person that I go with, say for example, I go with Avinash. Avinash would have seen or identified so many birds, impossible for me to keep track of all of it. So although he might have say he had seen 50 birds during that day's trail, I might have actually only seen or identified 30. So then I have a provision that although it is shared with me, I can delete certain things, and those deleted will remain only for my record. Or in some cases, if I have seen something extra, I can say that this, in addition to whatever is shared by X, this is the additional one that I have created. That is one. Second thing is, everybody can contribute photographs. So somebody, say for example, in a group, you decide that somebody does record track through mobile. Obviously, if you keep it on mobile, you will not be able to take photographs at the same time. So that person does it only recording. Somebody else will start entering photographs along with it. So that is how it can work. And then another good part is when you are entering the data through mobile or even through website, it once you select the location. So for example, if you're in BPS, and if I start entering, I see a great barbet. It is very unlikely that somebody would have seen the great barbet in BPS. So naturally, eBird on its own will not even show you that list. So it has that, once you select the location, it will create that base list for that location based on its whatever data that it has. And again, I mean, if you have really seen something which is not common there, but you have still seen it, you can have an option where you say, I want to see the rare ones as well. So then it allows to enter the data. But by default, it will restrict it to commonly seen birds over there. And it sometimes has the check on number of the birds that you would have seen. So for example, I say, I've seen the Eurasian wryneck, and I saw 10 Eurasian wrynecks. So that again, it will point, saying that it is not likely that you would have seen at BPS 10 Eurasian wrynecks. 1, 2 is fine. So that sort of checks and balance is there in the system. But of course, if you have really seen something abnormal, it allows you to enter the data. And the shortcuts part is actually very good. Sometimes what happens is that entering the long names, some of the birds will have bigger names. Pinstripe teat babbler. It's a big name to enter if you want to search accordingly. What it does is eBird has 4 character short names or acronyms for each of it. So for example, if I want to enter common kingfisher, the first 2 letters of first word and 2 letters of the second word. So CO and KI. If I type only that, it will search common kingfisher. If there are 3 or 4 names, if there are 4, it will take 1 each from the first, second, third, and fourth. That forms the name. Or if there are 3, for example, Oriental dwarf kingfisher, so it will have O, D, and KI. So if you type only that, it will show you the name directly. So that on field, it becomes very easy. Not only field, even when you do it on web, or searching through the big list, it becomes very difficult. So using these acronyms, it's very easy. Of course, with good things, there are certain lacunae, certain problems that you face. Sometimes, of course, I think they are working on it still. Sometimes you enter that list, and the way it works is somebody actually looks at the data. So they have for each region an expert identified. eBird has identified an expert who will go through the data and try to see whether is this possible, whether you would make some wrong entries or you attach wrong photograph to a particular species. All those sort of corrections that they do. But sometimes it takes time. So for example, some of the cases I came to know the data that I had entered in 2019, I get to know now. Now somebody will come and say, okay, this time you had entered the data seems to be incorrect. So at times it becomes difficult for me to remember what I would have seen. So, but and I think they are now doing it correctly. For example, the last data that I entered for Lat Panchar trip that happened in first week of April, I got one correction just yesterday. So that's quite good. So they're probably taking care of that. And again, I mean, all these guys who are doing it, for example, Prathamesh does it here in Mumbai. All these guys are doing it. They're doing it just out of their own interest. I mean, they're not getting paid for all this work. So you can understand they will have their own work. Plus, in addition to that, they're doing it. So that might be taking the time. Second problem as such is here you can only enter the bird data. So for example, you would have seen mammals, you would have seen some flowers and all. You will not be able to enter that data in eBird. It is purely for birding. That's about eBird. Again, I mean, just a fun thing, since I'm more into photography, you typically the way it works in eBird is it will put a species in my life list if I would have seen it. So if I go somebody and that person has put the data into it, there's no photograph attached to it, that's fine, but it still goes into my life list. But since photographers will have their own understanding, so I'll say, okay, I have photograph, but not good photo. So I'll still not call a photo lifer. I'll call it record shot lifer. Again, there is no scientific or any standing to any of these terms. It's just that what gets used on the field. So for example, common coppersmith barbet, very common bird. Picture on the right, if I have this, I'll call it a record shot lifer. I can identify what bird it is. But it's not the picture I want to present or even keep for that matter. What is on the left? Yes, that's a good photo. Then I'll consider it as my photo lifer. And that's how I'll treat. But again, I mean, that is only purely from photographer's point of view. Second one that I use, iNaturalist. Here the advantage is basically it can take all sort of data. It can bird, it could be mammals, it could be plants, flowers, whatever that you want to enter, you can enter it here. And this tool I became aware little later. I mean, eBird I started using immediately because birding, of course, was my first interest area. So naturally, I started with that. But then I found this also a good tool to use. this is one. This is the web screen of iNaturalist. That again, this is my login, so it would have my observations, number of species that I would have seen, all those. Here the one part is I can also participate in terms of identification. So for example, a photo, if I see and I am able to identify, I'll be able to put that identification mark on that. So here it is showing identifiers. So 515 is the photographs that I have given my contributed in identifying. So here the positives, as I said, are all biodiversity can be recorded, and the AI part of that tool is very good. So first level of identification most of the time is done by the application. So for example, if you put a bird photograph, most likely it will identify the species. Sometimes it not to species level, sometimes to the family level, but it does. I mean, it is amazingly well. And the other thing I noticed is that if I keep tagging the photographs in my Lightroom, and when I export it, typically the tags are there with the photograph. So for example, if I've put something as a kingfisher, or if I put something as a kite, accipiter family and birding, so all that my hierarchy, birds, accipiter, kite, all those things will be there with that photograph. So if it is available there, iNaturalist, I think, uses that data as well, and will be able to show the ID accordingly. But this again is my observation. Probably I need to confirm it with them. But a lot of times I've seen sometimes the photograph is a little difficult, but since if there is identification available, then it uses that data as well. Here, one good thing is the moment I enter data, it doesn't become, doesn't get into the research category, so to say. I mean, has some standing. So basically what happens is you enter the data, somebody else also says that, yes, this is the ID. If there are two observations which are matching, then it goes into research category. So for the idea is basically that data can get used by somebody else. Till the time it is just an observation. So you have the record, but since nobody has corroborated that fact or nobody has verified that it is correct, it will remain in that non-research category or whatever. There's no non-research category, but it is not in the research category. That's all it is. And then sometimes what happens is that 2 or 3 people have identified it correctly. Then fourth person comes and says, no, all of you, whatever you're saying is wrong. Then again, it goes back into non-research category, because it has to be a common understanding and experts have to agree to it. So here the responsibility is actually on everybody. So for example, if a friend of mine has put the data and I go ahead and say, okay, automatically it becomes a research category because 2 people have said okay for the data. So you have more responsibility while identifying things. The advantage here is that you are not dependent on a particular expert in that area, like the way eBird does. So if that person doesn't have time, it will get into loops. It will take more time, which doesn't happen here because somebody or the other will be able to help you, will be able to put that identification for you. Problems here that I have seen is data like the number of species that you've seen. So for example, we went there and I saw Pacific golden plover. How many of them I've seen, that data I can't record. I mean, the one way of looking at it is to put photo 10 times, the same photo or similar photos. But typically we'll go and for a species, we'll put one photo. And here there's no provision for putting number of species seen over there. Sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times, if you don't have a photograph, it will be, at least I am not able to enter data into it. So if I don't have a photograph, there is no way I can enter data in iNaturalist, because the first basic thing is upload photos and then do the identification on top of it and then enter the data. Here, entering the data, it is little time consuming compared to what eBird and all, because once you enter all the data for each or select together and then put location where you have seen it, then for each of the photo, identify the species, all those sort of thing takes time. And till the time you do it for all identification, then you will not be able to have the data going into their database. So it is little time consuming to use, but the advantage of course is that any data can be recorded here. In terms of practical utilization that I have seen or used is research scientists can use the data as well as photos. I think Cornell has their own identifier applications as well for birding, Merlin app and such. They use the data that gets pushed through eBird, So that data gets you. So again, I mean, they typically request you to upload data without your watermarks or without your names anywhere, because that they can easily use the data for identification purpose. It helps you to identify the seasonality of certain populations. So some birds are seen only in these months, not in other months. Those sort of things. Plus the distribution maps. So particular type of sunbird, it can be seen only in the northeast regions. So all that data will over a period of time, eBird will have that complete data, or iNaturalist will have that data saying that this bird or this species is seen in so and so areas, not in other. Sometimes if you see at any of the other places, which could be a vagrant there, or you could have done a data entry mistake, that will get corrected. But all such things will keep on enriching the applications, eBird or iNaturalist. My own photographs, I am giving them for some of the BNHS publications. Sometimes I create collages so that I share with the BNHS teams, or Makarand has once or twice used my photos for. He writes so good. In addition to that, he puts photographs. So one or two photographs he has also used. And recently, I've started contributing it to the Wikimedia Commons. So Wikipedia that we see, there the photographs are taken from these Wikimedia Commons. So then they will pick it up from there and then put it into Wikipedia pages. In terms of current activities, what I do is after every trip, share the observations on eBird as well as iNaturalist. So both the things that I do, birds for eBird and everything onto iNaturalist. So from that point of view, now good part is, earlier I was only using eBird, so it was only birding. But now since I'm using iNaturalist as well, I make it a point that if I see a butterfly, I'll try to take a photograph. Or if orchid, then I'll try to take a photograph of them. One thing I probably still need to do is that even for plants or trees, big trees, even start photographing them. So far, I'm not doing it, but at least something more than the birds that I've started putting it in iNaturalist. So therefore, I take photographs of those things as well. Occasionally, I write blogs as well. So I put the trip log with photograph, of course, into my website. So that also I do. Create collages for comparison purpose. I'll just give few examples here. So this is one example where Eurasian curlew and Eurasian whimbrel, similar looking birds, but still they are different. So again, a lot of times what happens is that if we see them together, it becomes very easy to identify. But if you see in isolation, at least for people like me who are newcomers, it becomes difficult. So to get that idea, I try to create such collages where both are seen together. And so then you probably try to make, I mean, when you say both have long beaks, the beak of the Eurasian curlew is really big. So those sort of differentiation can be seen clearly once you see it together. Similar thing, the desert fox and Indian fox. The tail endings are of different colors, or the foot are of different colors. So those sort of segregations are clearly seen. So I try to take photographs where the distinguishing thing is more visible or clearly visible in that picture. These are weavers. महाराष्ट्रात आपण बाया विवर्स खूप बघतो, पण देर आर अदर विवर्स ॲज वेल. अँड जस्ट सिमिलर अगेन, टेकिंग फोटोग्राफ ऑफ these weavers, one thing you have to understand is during breeding and non-breeding, they will look different. So I have tried to taken breeding images of all these birds, these three weavers. Sometimes they, again, I mean, this I'm still puzzled. The male and female of the bird look so different. I always had that question, how do they identify themselves? But whatever, they obviously will have their mechanism. But at least for us, it becomes very difficult. So unless somebody tells you that it is the female of the same bird, it's impossible. And even the common names wise, you would see that most of the common names are given based on the how the male looks, not what the female looks. So male, that way from the name it becomes little easier to remember. For example, blue capped obviously is a blue cap, so you can easily see, yeah, this must be blue cap. No way you can make out that female is blue cap, right? So just to keep that information, I try to create collages of this sort. I do social media photo sharing. Typically what I do is WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, on different groups I try to share photograph, not just photograph, but with some basic information. The idea mainly here is that because of that, I need to do a lot of reading on my own. So again, I will not claim that I remember everything that I write, but because I keep writing, there are certain nuggets, certain facts I still keep registering. So that's my way of keeping in touch. So for example, even when during this lockdown period when we couldn't travel, I could, and again, a lot of information is available on the internet. So you see, search 10 different sites, you will get whatever information that you want on a bird or a mammal or whatever species that you're looking at. So I try to get that data, and with the data, I try to share it with them. Finally, this is again from point of view, there is just so much that I need to learn or I can learn, and hardly anything I have touched. But plant world, that I have absolutely zero knowledge. So people think that I keep going to the jungle, they will know, "Arey, hey, झाड़ कुठलं है?" I have no clue. I can't make out even the simple trees, frankly. But yeah, that's one area which I need to improve on. So I know at least that this is the area that I need to know, or probably start looking at it more. Insects. There's a vast variety, or what do you say, प्रकार आहे त्याच्यात की इट इज नो वे आय कॅन कीप ट्रॅक. बट बिकॉज आय बीन गोइंग विथ युवराज फॉर सो लॉंग, काहीतरी थोडे तरी त्यातले माहीत झाले. बट one thing I came to know about it is at least there is so much that I don't know. That's all I came to know. That is what I'll say. Even birds and mammals. I mean, birds. Although I've seen probably around 600 odd birds from India, but there are so many areas that are unknown to me, unexplored by me. So I'm aware of that. Now so therefore my approach is basically, if I keep getting worried about these things that I don't know so many aspects of it, I'll never be able to probably reach a level where I'm satisfied. So my approach is simple. I'll not get worried about whatever I can do, I'll be happy with it. So most important, whatever trips that I go for, I try to enjoy it. Whether you see whatever the targeted species or not, that is immaterial. I mean, for that particular hour or day, you might feel that अरे हाँ आज नाही दिसलंय, etc. Dr. Gakwad probably will know, we struggled actually last week to see the rufous necked hornbill. I mean, finally we saw it, but that was our last day. But it's okay. Sometimes you go and you don't see a particular bird or particular mammal. That's fine. I mean, I don't have regrets later. I mean, that day I might feel दिसायला पाहिजे होता, but that's okay. To that. So I enjoy it even without that. And next thing that I'm trying to do is try to keep records, whatever way possible, whatever with my little understanding. Just keep some records. Somebody somewhere will use it. That's the hope idea. Thank you.